Well, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We are going to be taking a look at closing GP modules. We have a lot of content, so we're going to keep things very short, but I do have some housekeeping notes. Please use the Q&A function to enter in any questions you might have. Following this session, we'll be sending you one, possibly two emails. The first one everyone will get. It will have a link to a recording of this session. It will have a copy of the slides and a short survey for you. Please allow up to 48 hours to receive that email. Secondly, if you are here for CPE, you must answer all of the poll questions. And if you're eligible for CPE, your certificate will be sent to you in a separate email. And that's going to be coming from a sister company of ours. And they ask that you allow up to 2 weeks to receive that. If after 2 weeks you haven't received your certificate, please reach out to me. I'm going to put my contact information in the chat. It's dawn.westerberg@lbmc.com, and I will chase that down for you. In 2 years, I've only had to do that twice, so I'm pretty confident you'll get your certificate as planned. Our session today is sponsored by VersaPay. And even if you're not here for CPE credit, I would urge you to be sure to answer our final poll question, which is poll question number 6. If everyone who answers that poll question will be entered into a drawing, and VersaPay is sponsoring that, and the winner of that drawing will receive a $250 Amazon gift card. So without further ado, I am turning this over to our senior consultant, Sandy Whitman.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Dawn. I appreciate that. So we have a lot to cover. So I want to just mention that we're going to be going back and forth between our PowerPoint slide deck and actual GP to look at the navigation that we're talking about. But we also have a Training Dynamo workbook that is an option for you. I'll call out the pages as we go along so that you can follow along and keep notes if you like to do that. This workbook is a really handy guide for how you do things like your period end processes, as well as your year end processes. So I will call out those page numbers so you can keep track of where we are. This is what your Training Dynamo workbook looks like if you have received it, or if you've received it in prior years when you've attended this session. So congratulations, your company has survived another year. It's a wonderful thing. The thing that I would say the most important to your year-end process is if you can improve your month-end close process, your year-end close will be easy. So the biggest issue that we're going to discuss is the importance of balancing your general ledger and your subledgers. So there is absolutely a workflow to how that process goes. So in GP, the year-end close for the general ledger summarizes all of the activity of your profit and loss accounts for the fiscal year, and it creates an entry to the retained earnings account. All the profit accounts are typically used for things like AR and sales and those kinds of things. The year-end process also for general ledger also pushes the balances, the final balances of your balance sheet accounts into the beginning balance field for your reporting and inquiries. So there's two different kinds of things that are taking place there, depending on whether you have your accounts set up as P&L accounts or balance sheet accounts. We will look at this in terms of the workflow. We're going to start with our distribution series. We're going to go to the core modules, those additional modules, and finally to the general ledger. So the secret to a pain-free year-end close, as I mentioned, it's all about the period end close. So if you have a solid plan for how you close each and every month, when you get to your year end, it's really just doing that last period close and a few extra steps. So solid processes using potentially this workbook that we're looking at. So I'm on page 8 in the workbook now. And on this, it talks about the pre-close checklist. And we're using that for all of the companies, all of your GP companies, and the server. So we're going to do some things like we're going to engage our IT department even early, weeks or even months in advance of your close. And we're going to ask them to do things like checking the disk space on the server, checking the memory. Like if you're running low on memory, this is the time to get it fixed before you attempt your Microsoft Dynamics GP close. Then we're going to create some folders, a year-end folder, one per company, maybe one for each of the different modules. And we're going to place all of our reports into those year-end folders so that we have them as a means of being able to get back to the data that's a part of the reconciling as well as the closing of each of those modules. We do SQL backups multiple times throughout this process. So make sure that you engage your IT department in knowing when that you want to do the backups and that they're available to you if something goes wrong and you need to restore to a backup. Doesn't happen often, but you certainly want to have that backup in place in case something goes wrong. So checking that server disk space, there is a calculation on page 9 in your workbook that tells you how to calculate how much space is necessary for your year-end closing. Make sure you check your space. Make sure you have plenty of space on your server so that you don't run into any issues. Some of these reports that are processed in the midst of these closing steps take a ton of paper. You want to save them as .txt files or PDF files. You do not want to print them out. You'll take much too long to print them out, and it'll be paper that really is not very useful to you later. If you have text or PDF files, you'll be able to access them, and they'll be saved in a nice storage place that you've created as a part of our setup. So we're on page 11, and we're going to first set up our new fiscal year. The navigation to get there is at the bottom of this slide. We go to Administration, Setup, Company, and Fiscal Periods, and we create a new year. So we're going to go ahead and jump over to our GP. And I'm going to navigate to my Administration area page. And in the Company section, I'm looking for company and fiscal periods. And then I can create a brand new year based on when my last year was created. So I've got years created all the way through 2030. So I'm going to create a new year for you today for 2031. Yours will likely be 2025. So I use the tab navigation. That means that I tabbed out of that field. And the first day of my next year is the first day of my fiscal year based on how I've had my prior years created. So my first day is 01/01 of 2031 and tab, and then last day is 12/31/2031. And then if I click on the calculate button on the ribbon, it creates a new year for me, and all of those periods for that 2031 can all now be validated, periods 1 through 12. And I can use the close all button to make sure that all of those get closed so that nothing can be posted to that future year until I'm ready to open individual ones. Now, if you like to use the words January, February, March, you can also change the words in that period name for each one of these periods so that they don't just say periods 1 through 12, they would actually say January through December. And once you've completed that, you click OK, and that new year is now available for you to open periods when you're ready to. The next thing that we want to do is make sure that we know who is logged into our GP. Many of the steps that we're going to undertake require that users be logged out of GP, and that's properly logged out. That means that there's not an activity left over, there's not a record still sitting in there from a dynamics.com file on a RDS server or something like that. So the best way to see who might still be in your GP is to navigate to Administration, utilities, and user activity, in which case you would be able to see all of the users that are currently logged into your GP. So back here on my GP, under Administration and Utilities, I can see under System is User Activity. Now, it's possible that you have a password on some of these settings, in which case you may need to coordinate with your IT people to find out what the password is for this system level activities. Some companies have it, it's a setup within GP, and you might need that password to get into these. So in this case, I can see that only my SA user, which is me, is currently logged in to the Fabricam company. So I would then be able to go forward with activities for my closing steps. An additional thing that I want to do is make sure that you have all of the batches that you possibly can posted. Now that means financial batches, purchasing receipts, sales invoicing, all of those batches, receivables, payables, all the batches that you can have posted, you'll want to post before you take the next steps with that module's closing. Sometimes batches get stuck. And in this batch recovery window, we can see if there's any batches that happen to get stuck because of a transaction error or an edit that was required. So be sure and look in your batch recovery. The details are on page 13 to see if there are any batches that are stuck that need to get processed before you go on with next steps. And we'll look at additional steps to post for each module as we get to them. There is a hierarchy to posting. So you can post on an individual batch level, you can post on a series level, which is series posting, and you can go to the master posting, which is the top level, which is kind of our one-stop shop for unposted batches. So what I like about this master posting window is it gives me the full story. I can then be able to refer back to my department heads or those who are responsible for posting in individual modules, because I get the whole story here in master posting. So back in GP, I'm going to go to Administration, into my Routines section, and I am looking here for my master posting. Then in the series, I get to choose which series I'm looking at. So if I only want to see financial, I can look at just those financial batches where I can either mark all and post them, or I can evaluate them or have someone in my team who's responsible for financial batches. I would be able to charge them with making sure all of those batches got posted. And the same is true as you go through each individual series. Okay, we're ready for our very first backups. So backup is a critical step. We're on page 17, the SQL backups of the GP databases, right? So have that folder all created where all of your 2024 year-end activities are going to go to. Now, as I said at the beginning, we're going to make multiple backups as we go through all of these steps. So if at the end of the process, everything is great, it all closed just the way it needed to, there's no issues, then in a couple of weeks or maybe a month afterwards, then you can go and have some of these backups, special backups, removed from your system. You don't need to keep them forever. You do need to do those backups and keep them until you're certain that everything has worked just the way you want it to. And then you can talk with your IT people about cleaning up some of those. Please, please do not rely on your nightly backups. Those backups stop at a particular point in time that may not coordinate with when you're ready to do your activities. You may have had a whole day's worth of transactions before you're doing your closing steps. You want to have something done that was just immediately before you're doing your close steps. Okay, Dawn, I think we're ready for poll question number 1.
Here we go. And remember, if you are wanting to get CPE credit for this, all poll questions must be answered.
Okay, Don, I think we probably have had enough time with that poll question. Go ahead and close
Oh,
that one.
last call. I just saw one trickle in.
Great. Thank you for watching.
Okay, I'm going to end the poll now.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, so our first module, we're on page 19 in the workbook. We're talking about purchase order processing and the period end checklist. So in each of the modules, there's a set of steps that includes a checklist that you can make copies of that checklist. You can incorporate those details into an Excel checklist. But the really great thing about this workbook is it actually gives you practical steps to make sure that you've got all the details in place and things that you should be sure to reconcile. So one of the important things is this received not invoiced report. So there's a couple of different ways to get that report, but it's an important thing to balance to the one GL account that you should have assigned to all of your received but not yet invoiced for the purchasing module. We're going to balance that to that accrued purchases account. And then we have a couple of optional things, like you could choose to remove completed purchase orders, and we're going to look at what that means. It doesn't actually remove them. Depending on your settings, it actually moves them to history, as long as we're prepared for that when we do those settings. Okay, so very important step is to verify the PO history settings. So within our purchasing setup is some marks in our maintain history that tell whether or not we have agreed in GP to keep history for a variety of different kinds of tasks that relate to purchase order processing. So I'm going to navigate to purchasing setup and then purchase order processing. So I'm on my purchasing area page in my setup window, and I'm navigating to purchase order processing. So this section here in the maintain history gives me a place where I will check mark to indicate that I'm going to maintain the history within GP. And it really does mean that. So am I keeping the history of my purchase orders and receipts and account distributions? So even if you are not currently processing requisitions, that's the precursor to purchase orders, even if you're not keeping that history, even if you're not using that functionality, it doesn't hurt at all to keep that check mark marked. That way, every time you look here, you'll just know that everything that I could possibly keep in for history is in place, even if I don't use requisitions at this point in time. Okay, so we're validating that that control of history is being kept. And then we're going to look at that received not invoiced report. There are two ways to be able to get that. The first way is in the reports section under analysis. And this is a place where you create report options for this type of reports. And I'm going to scroll down in the list, and there's my received not invoiced report. You can create an option that has a number of different modifiers to it if you choose to. My preference is to make sure that there's nothing in the restrictions box, because you really should be looking at your RNI, received not invoiced, without any restrictions. Okay. So once you have a report option that's set with that restrictions, you can click on insert and print that report. It is a GP report, which means that it's not necessarily an easy one to export, but it is completely functional with all of the fields that you might need to assure that you have an amount that's not invoiced. It does consider returns, and then allows you the ability to be able to scroll to the bottom and look at this total, which should balance to your accrued account. Additionally, if you choose, there is a SQL Server Reporting Services, SSRS report version, which allows you to do a point in time. So the report I just processed to the screen here is as good as the information that GP has right now. So you have to produce it at your month end without looking at a historical perspective. If another receipt came in on the 1st that really related to last month, all of those kinds of things. But as of GP 2015 R2, there was a SSRS version of this RNI report that allows you to put in a cutoff date. So you're welcome to use that one as well. And if you need any help with deploying that SSRS version, please do reach out to us and let us give you a hand with that. So running the RNI report, reviewing that balance against our financial RNI account. So going to our financial area page in the inquiry section, looking at summary, and then looking for our accrued purchases account and validating that the total dollars at the close of that period balances to the GL or to the report that I just printed. And as you can see, mine doesn't. Okay, yours should. Okay, let's go over to page 24. And we're going to look at that last step that was on our checklist, which is removing completed purchase orders. So as long as you have those history check marks marked, then when you do this step, it's actually moving them from the open tables to the history tables. It does not delete them from the company database. So I'm going to the purchasing area page in the let's see, routines section, and I'm doing the remove completed purchase orders. Now you have a variety of ways to be able to move these to history. Now these are for completed purchase orders, which means that they've been received, they've been invoiced, invoice matched, and are truly complete. So you can do it based on a document number range. You can also do it by a document date range. So in some cases, people might do this based on the first 6 months of the last year. You know, whatever keeps your system moving efficiently and giving you the abilities to do lookups, all of those things are available for you to be able to select a range. And these are absolutely a company preference as to how you do that selection criteria and move those POs to history. And once you get your restrictions in place, you click on the process button and it will produce a report for you to be able to see what transactions happened. I'm going to jump back to my slide deck. This slide speaks specifically to those restrictions and removing the completed purchase orders. So from a PO perspective or purchase orders perspective, those are the only processes. The period end checklist for the final period of the year is the last thing you need to do for purchase order processing. There's no special routine or button or utility for purchase order processing year end. So I'll pause there just for a second and ask Dawn, do we have any questions as it relates to what we've covered so far?
There's nothing in the Q&A. I did receive an email. There's a little bit of confusion about the workbook. That was a separate purchase. It's not something that LBMC Tech distributes.
Very good. Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, our next module that we're going to talk about is sales order processing. So we're on page 26 in the workbook. And again, we have a list of steps or checklist that you can copy, you can use as a template for an Excel version of something like this. And all of these steps are things that we recommend, right? Reviewing and posting all of your transactions for the period. That means anything that's not an open sales order, right? Which can continue to remain until those sales orders get fulfilled and invoiced. Empty or unused SOP batches, delete those, post all those batches, and then check your SOP history settings. Very similar to what we did in the purchase order module, we're going to do something similar on the sales side. We're going to look at those setups, and then we'd go back and close the fiscal period to make sure that no one posted anything to that sales order processing module afterwards. So one of the differences about sales transactions is sales transactions typically automatically move to history when the document is posted, voided, or transferred to the next step. However, you might have posted only or transferred only part of an order, right? If you cancel the remaining quantities on a line item in a sales order and it doesn't have that last part of transferring to an invoice, then you don't have that automatic move to the history tables. So we're again on page 27, we're again going to back up our databases, make sure you're backing things up before you do this, and then we're going to move those transactions to history that may not have automatically moved. So I'm going to go to my GP and I'm going to go to my sales area page. In the utilities section, I'm going to go to the reconcile remove sales documents. And again, you have the options for some of the choices, like if I wanted to pick based on document numbers, I can do that. So if I know I have a few that are still sitting in the open tables, I can pick them specifically. I can also use this to be able to pick a range if I wanted to do that. And I have this radio button, so I can pick which side of this I want to do. In this case, I'm doing the remove. And if I wanted to see first what was going to happen, if I just mark the print report only and click process, it's only going to print the report. It's not going to actually move anything yet. Then I can come back to the window and choose without print report only. And in that time, when I click process, it's actually moving things to history. So two different choices that's really dependent on whether this box is marked or not. Okay. Be sure you have a good backup in place before you do this. One thing I want to point out then is we would typically go back to our financial into our routines where our, into our setup where our fiscal periods are, and close the fiscal period for the sales order processing so that people are not able to post to that period once we did those steps for our sales order processing module close. Okay, so again, on the sales order processing, there's not additional steps for sales transactions to close those. Once we validate our maintain history is marked and we do those remove, there's no additional steps that you have to do for closing the year once these period end steps are completed for sales. Okay. So this slide, again, specifically talks about that print button. If everything looks okay, then you can move on to without the print box marked. Not a special routine button or utility for sales order processing year end. However, there is a potential for doing a tax year end close. So taxes in GP apply across multiple modules. It applies across sales, purchasing, and potentially the company if you're using use tax. So the tax year end close only has to be completed once. It applies to all of those modules, regardless of which module you are using those for. Okay. And we are on page 28. And we're going to talk about the timing of payable and receivable year-end close next. Any questions on the sales order processing or anything else yet, Dawn?
Nope. I think we can go ahead.
Great, thank you. Okay, so timing is very important for payables and receivables management. So on page 28, it talks about those potentials for how things will, how the timing will impact the activities that you're doing. So the year to date information will be incorrect on some of your inquiries and smart lists if you post transactions for the new year before closing the prior year. Now, that doesn't mean that you are required to close on December 31st at the end of the day. It just means that you need to be aware that these year-to-date values may not be accurate that you're looking at in some of the inquiry windows and in some of the smart list data. So I'm going to show you where some of those values exist so that you're armed with enough information to decide whether you are okay with seeing that information incorrectly, and you can use other values to be able to validate data for a year-to-date number versus what's in that year-to-date field. Okay? So examples, year-to-date and last year information on smart lists and inquiry windows. So if you were looking at this smart list called vendors 1099 year-to-date, life year-to-date, and life, if you don't close on December 31st and you have a standard calendar, then these numbers will likely not be accurate. And if you're looking at the vendor yearly summary, these numbers would not be accurate. Now, you would have every ability to be able to summarize data in other ways to be able to get to a year-to-date number. You just would not look at these values to get the year-to-date information if you decided to go ahead with payables after 12/31 and before you do your closing. Okay. So in this example that I have on the screen, the value of 12,895 should be what shows here and is not that case. So that in the workbook on page 29, there are some stories from the GP trenches about things where people have assumed that those numbers were all going to be accurate and didn't realize or recognize that because of their timing for closing, it changed the values in those fields to not necessarily represent what they expected. So kind of funny stories if you want to look through those as well. Okay, so receivables management, separate from sales orders, right? These are core modules now. We're looking at receivables management period end checklists. So first we make sure all of our AR transactions are posted. We're on page 30 in the workbook. We're going to review all of our unapplied documents, either by a report or a smart list, and make sure we apply everything that it makes sense to apply. We need to run the age function to age our customer balances. So I want to mention that although it appears that GP has aged them all the time when we run a trial balance, there actually is an age function that should be run periodically. Now, there are steps that aging process does that make sure that anything like your collections module remain in sync with the aging function. So although it looks like things are aging without running this process, it is our recommendation that you do the aging process, and I'll show you how to get to that in just a moment. And then you're going to print your final historical age trial balance dated for the last day of the period and balance it to the general ledger AR account or accounts, and then close those fiscal periods. Now, there are some optional things that you could do, like moving paid transactions to history. You can assess finance charges if that's your processes, printing statements, transferring commissions. So there's a variety of optional tasks depending on what you use in your receivables module. Okay. So we're going to look first at that age function. So I'm going to go back to GP, and I'm on the sales area page. And in my routines function, in my routines pane, I'm picking aging. It's a very short process, but it depends on how many customers you have, but you're picking a date. The account types, most customers are open item customers for account types, but it doesn't hurt anything if you leave it set for all. That is the default. You can leave it set for all. And then in this section, the statement cycles, the way that those are selected has to do with using the Shift tab and the Control key when you're picking things. So as an example, if I click on weekly, only weekly gets chosen. If I hold the Shift down and pick monthly, it picks the whole range. If I go back to weekly and hold the Control key and pick monthly, I can randomly select from that list. For the most part, the recommendation is that you pick all statement cycles, which means you could start at the top and pick all of them. Or by default, all of these should be highlighted blue when you open this window. You have the potential for doing this for only specific customers. And then this part, I typically recommend that you mark the No Report button. So it will produce a report. It is a different format than the agings that we usually recommend you use in the trial balance or historical trial balances. So there's not a reason to generate the report in this process. So just use the No Report option and then click Process. And it will process the aging function to make sure that all of the buckets that you have set up for your aging are all in the right place before you're ready to do your next steps for your reconciling the aging to your general ledger. Okay, our next step was to review our unapplied documents. So there's two options, and we're on page 33. There's two options. There's either a smart list that's available for you to use that shows the unapplied documents, or there's a GP report that shows those as well. So this smart list, I'm going to navigate to the GP button and pick smart list. And I'm going to click on the plus next to sales and the plus next to receivable transactions. And this smart list is provided to you out of the box. All the ones that have a star at the end, that means Microsoft gave them to you when they deployed smart lists. But this unapplied documents should give you a list of all of the items, the documents that have unapplied balances. So this list is something that you could potentially export to Excel and be able to use this as a tool for reconciling your period end. So again, I suggest that you do this every month. It shouldn't be something that you wait until the end of the year to do, but I like that this gives you which document type it is, so you can see if they're finance charges and maybe you want to write those off if they didn't pay them, right? It shows all the different types, payments, returns, service repairs, if you use those modules. It shows all of those types of transactions. The other alternative is in the sales reports under analysis. I can use the unapplied documents and again create a report option, which I can show you here has no restrictions in it. I'll check my destination, make sure it's going to the screen, and then I can use that option that I created, insert it, and print it to be able to see all of those similar kinds of things, only in this case, I have a customer with all of those related transactions showing the totals for original transactions and current transaction amounts. So this gives me a different way of looking at similar data. They actually should be very similar in their results, the smart list or this one, to be able to know how to then take the data and apply what you choose to based on what you know from your customers about what data should be applied to individual transactions so that everything's done for that before you close your year. Now, the applying sales documents function, once you make those decisions, is accomplished in the transactions area page of this transactions pane of the sales area page. So I would go to the Apply Sales Documents. You can look up a customer. We'll stay with our Aaron Fitz. Then you can look up a document based on whether it's a type of a payment, a credit memo, or return. And it'll give me a list of all of those payments along with the remaining amounts. So I can see if there's anything remaining on those payments. In this case, it looks like the only thing I have is a return that still needs to be applied. So I can restrict that to returns, pick the return that I want to apply, and down in the bottom, it gives me all of the choices of things that I could apply the return to. I have an unapplied amount that shows this dollar amount. And as I mark transactions, this unapplied amount will be going down to show what's left of the unapplied balance. So I can, if my intent is to apply the whole thing, I can continue to go down and mark transactions for it to apply against until my unapplied amount gets to 0. I also want to notice the apply date and the apply posting date. Those dates should be related to when you want them to both apply within the subledger and apply posting within the general ledger. So you'll apply all of those documents. Now I want to note on page 35, in the bottom of the page, there's a box that talks about once AR transactions have been moved to history, then you have to move transactions back out of history in order to apply them differently than they were done before they went to history. So there is a professional services tools library tool to unapply receivable documents so that you can do that apply function. If you don't have the PSTL installed, we're happy to help you with that. We can help you get it installed and then train you to use that apply sales documents tool so that you can unapply things and be able to apply them properly. Okay. We talked about the aging function. On page 37, there's one additional functionality that I want to make mention of. It's to write off over and under payments. So again, I want you to be sure that you have a backup before you process these kinds of things. But in the customer cards, you have an opportunity to create the ability to write off small balances of customers' payments. So if, for instance, the invoice was for $18.25, then if they paid $18 and you're just not going to go about collecting the 25 cents, you have an ability on the options button of a customer to indicate a maximum write-off amount and if you want to be able to allow those write-offs to happen. So in this case, my maximum write-off is $25 for this customer. So I can use the functionality, which is kind of a mass function for writing off over and under payments, but the maximum that would ever happen for this customer is $25 based on what I have set up in this customer maintenance window. Then I can navigate to the routines section under write-off documents, where I have the ability to do underpayments or overpayments. I can create one write-off per customer or per document. I can put in a write-off limit. So if I wanted to match that limit, I can do that. A cutoff date, and then I can do individual customers, or I can do customer classes, or even customer types. So if I wanted to do only my Aaron Fitz, I could add him. And then if you use national accounts, you can do a write-off from the parent or from the child. And you also have this preview button, which is pretty awesome. So it's going to show you what the customer balance was and even what the write-off amount's going to be before you actually take action. So you can actually look at this, you can get approval, you can route that to a manager to say, this is what I'm going to do with the screenshots, and they can approve those write-offs. And then once those are approved, you click the process button and it will process those documents, overpayment and underpayments. Okay, so a nice functionality there to be able to do that in mass in a big hurry. Now, in prior modules, we looked at module level setups for where we're keeping track of history settings. On the customers, as well as on vendors, those history settings are controlled on a customer and vendor level, not at the module level. So again, just as important, those history settings. On page 39, we're going to look at how you set those customer settings on individual customers, and then how you can use a smart list to make sure you've got all your history settings set appropriately. So first I'm going to navigate to cards and customer. And again, we'll pick on our Aaron Fitz. I'm going to the options tab. And down here in this lower left-hand corner is where I'm controlling the maintain history. All 4 of those boxes should always, always be marked. Now, nobody wants to sit and go through every single customer record to see if the options have that listed that way. So there is an ability to be able to have a smart list that includes those maintain history. And in the appendix for this workbook, it shows how to do a smart list for those kinds of criteria. And I'll show you quickly in my smart list search for my customers. So if I was looking at my customers, I can go to my search criteria and include I'm going to scroll down to the letter K, keep calendar history, keep distribution history, keep period history. These are the 4 fields that represent those fields in those windows. So I can add it to columns and I can add them to search criteria. And you also have that if you've got your workbook on page 78. So you can set up a smart list to review those history settings and validate them for all of your customers at once. Okay, moving paid transactions to history. So Dynamics GP does not automatically move AR transactions to history when they're fully paid or applied. So one of the tasks on a period end basis is to move these sales to history. So we're on page 40. We're going to go to our sales routines and paid transaction removal. So again, because we've checked our history settings, we're keeping history. It does not mean removal like remove it from the database. It means move it from open to the history that we are keeping. So you can do this based on ranges of customers. You can also do it based on class IDs. And then you indicate which things you want to remove, whether it's NSFs or non-sufficient funds, voids, waived, paid transactions, and checks. So you'll notice that NSFs and checks have dates in them. So our recommendation is that you backdate the cutoff date for NSFs and checks, backdate them a month. Because then if you happen to get an NSF check, which hard to imagine, but some companies do still accept checks. If you have a check that comes back as NSF, you want that to still be in your open transactions, not historical, so that you can process it as NSF and go about your collections. So we backdate this a month. So in this case, I would do 03/12/27. And this one I would do 03/12/27. And I can do it for all of my customers and then click the process button. Okay. That moves my transactions to history and makes my lookups and my system more efficient and more speedy because it's got things in the tables that make sense. We're going to do a age trial balance. So in the reports section, you can go to trial balance. I recommend that you either use the trial balance with options or the historical age trial balance. You can print that report, print it for the period end for your last period. Make sure you save that into the folders that you have kept for your 2024 activities. You'll keep that for your year end. That will be your support in case you have a set of auditors that likes to come and look at your support documents. And I went a long ways, and now I'm going to jump back to my slide deck and just kind of see where we're at. We talked about the unapplied documents report. We looked at that smart list. We did some aging of our AR balances. We looked at how to do the write-offs. We looked at the verify customer history. So this slide deck is just validating and giving you the screens for the details that we walked through actually in GP, and also coordinates with the workbook if you have it. If not, you have this to be able to refer to. We've paid transactions. Okay, so we are now at page 43, and we're looking at the year-end close checklist. So this is the first module that actually has additional steps for our year-end close function. So receivables management has year-end close steps, right? We're gonna get the IT folks to do a dynamics and company database backups. We're gonna close the calendar year under the year-end close function. We're gonna save that report to our 2024 folders. And then we could, that sales tax period function that I mentioned, we can do those. So back in GP, we're going to our routines section, and you'd pick year-end close. So fiscal and calendar, if your fiscal year is the same as your calendar year, you can close both at the same time. If not, you can pick either fiscal or calendar. That's a radio button. And you always want to be sure that your print report box is marked, and then click the process button. Keep the report, make sure you print it to a PDF or a text file into that 2024 folders that you have. So what is it doing? So it's summarizing the year-end activities and rolling last year into the values into the last year values. And it clears the activity since your last close in the year-to-date fields so that it can start keeping track of those values for year-to-date for the next year. Okay. Dawn, did we have a question?
No questions.
Great. Okay, so I mentioned if you have tax, you have a year-end close function in the tax year-end as well. And that tax year-end is done in the administration area page in routines, and it's the tax year-end close. So you can do it at the point of receivables, you can do it at the point of payables. It is one or the other. You don't need to do it multiple times. You'd make sure that you've got close year and print report, and then click the process button. Okay, so if we don't have any questions, I'm going to go back to my slide deck and we're going to move on to payables. So there is an example of our receivables year-end report. So it's in this slide deck. These reports are huge. You don't want to print them out. I guess we're ready for poll question number 2.
We've got poll question number 2 up, and please remember that if you wish to receive CPE credit, all poll questions must be answered.
Okay.
We still have some coming in.
Okay, let me know when you're ready.
All righty. Please make your selection as we're going to close this down in just a couple of seconds. I'm going to end the poll.
Thank you, Dawn.
You're welcome.
Okay, so our payables management period end checklist. We're going to post all those batches. We're going to run our historical age trial balance, reconcile payables to our general ledger, and then close those fiscal periods. That's the period end. That means that we're doing it 12 times a year or more, depending on how you have your periods set up. So there then is a year-end prep list. So I have an addendum that I'm going to provide with the slide deck that has some additional things about 1099 forms. In the past couple of versions of GP, there have been additional functionality added to GP to do 1099 prep. If you're still using 1099s directly out of GP, there's definitely some good features that are now available. So in the version that just came out in October, like of this year, so 6 weeks ago, there's an ability to be able to have 1099 masking for your 1099 IDs. So it's a option for you to be able to mask those IDs. It's not a requirement. The payer's TIN won't be masked. It's the vendor's tax number that would get masked. So I'll include this with your slide deck. You also have an ability to restrict the 1099 information. So as you're doing the validation for your 1099 information, there's some new functionality in this version that will help you to be able to restrict that and get your 1099 data validated easier. So if you're interested in either of those functionalities, we'd be happy to help you with an upgrade so that you can use those for your 1099 processing. Please be sure and get in touch with us soon so that we can get that scheduled if you'd like. There's also been some additional things that were available in a couple of other versions, and I'll talk about those in just a moment. So again, verifying the vendor history settings is done on a vendor by vendor basis. Within that vendor maintenance window under options, you would typically see these settings, and you can use a similar set of criteria in a smart list to be able to get those settings reviewed on a mass basis instead of individually by vendors. So you're going to review and post all those AP batches, complete the period end checklist, you'll print your historical age trial balance, and then you're going to do your backups. So SQL backups for the Dynamics and the company databases, print your 1099s or 1096 and 1096 forms, and then close the calendar and or fiscal periods. So GP does have 1099 functionality. I want to mention that there was a change in 1099 requirements recently that essentially moved most everyone to electronic filing. GP does not do electronic filing. However, we have some tools that are available to you that LBMC can recommend and provide for you to provide you with the ability to do electronic filing versus a couple of different methods. If you'd like more detail on what can be done to help you file electronically, please reach out to your strategic account manager or to one of your consultants that you're in contact with. We can help you with your options for electronic forms filing. There are new forms available in GP that include the non-employee compensation, right? The NEC forms. There is a year-end update that may be required depending on which GP version that you're on. And, right, this is my mention of that electronic file. If the sum of all types of returns is 10 or more. So that's a pretty low number right? So if you've got W-2s, 1099s, etc., for anything where there's 10 or more, then you may have to do that electronic filing. The gathering the details for those forms, though, that functionality does exist within GP, and that started within, I believe, 18.5 GP. So back a couple of years ago, we've had the ability to be able to control our NEC compensation details so that once we're ready to report on those, we can give the values to that electronic filing system for it to be able to report those values. So even if you can't do the filing itself, we can certainly help you make sure that your setup is such that it can report on the information that you have out of GP. We also do have that DBA, so doing business as in the new tax type, DBA for vendors. There's a setups for NEC for 1099 miscellaneous updates. And with the version of 18.6, which came out in October of 2023, for those of you who do have the 10 or under, you don't have to buy paper forms any longer because the forms all print with boxes now on blank paper. So we're happy to help you with any of those choices for using NEC forms, 1099s, et cetera, right? Okay, moving on from 1099s. I realize we're going quite fast, so thank you for keeping up with me. The last step, once you've done all those period end steps, is to do the payable management year-end close. So again, if fiscal year does not equal your calendar year, you can do them separately. So we're in the purchasing routines and year-end close. So I'd go to the purchasing area page under routines and pick year-end close. You can pick fiscal, calendar, or all. Be sure the print report box is marked, and please notice that this payables year-end window has a close year button at the bottom as opposed to a process button on the ribbon. So I'm sorry to say they were not standardized. So this one looks different than the other one did. They both do the same thing, right? So that would be your payables year-end close. And there are reports that come out of this process. Be sure that you keep those year-end reports, print them to either a text file or a PDF file, put them in with your 2024 year-end close information. So what's happening while this function is taking place? So on page 54 in your workbook, you'll see that the year-end close process summarizes the activity since your last close, and it clears the activity since your last close in the year-to-date fields. So in all these different listed fields, all those values are getting updated to move things to additional boxes or fields to be able to keep those under control. Okay, any questions about payables management?
No questions.
Great. Okay, our next module, inventory control. So we're on page 56. So our period end checklist includes reviewing and posting inventory stock counts and adjustments for the period, checking that batch recovery window to make sure that there's nothing that got stuck, printing our stock status and or HITB, historical inventory trial balance. And by the way, if you're not using the historical inventory trial balance as your subledger validation tool, I would hope that you might take my input and get in touch with us at LBMC. We'd love the opportunity to get you started on that. The HITB is the only report or function that Microsoft recommends to reconcile your inventory subledger to the general ledger. The stock status was never created to do that. And there are transaction types that don't hit the stock status, which could cause you to be out of balance. So we'd love the opportunity to help you with using the historical inventory trial balance. So we're going to verify that item history settings, reconcile that to GL, close that fiscal period, and then move on to our year-end functions. So the only one that I'll mention in this is the item history settings. So if I go to my inventory items and look in my cards at my item records, I'll see in my options the maintain history. So let me bring up an item. And the option to maintain history shows up here like it does on customers and vendors. Again, you can add those fields to a smart list so you don't have to go item by item, but you also should know that on all three of these master records, customers, vendors, and items, when you create item classes, there's an ability to be able to mark these within the classes, and then when an item gets the item class information rolled out to it from the class when you select it, it would then populate those fields. So I highly recommend the use of classes, but also to be sure that you have those settings in place for every item that you use. Okay. So running your HitB, making sure it balances to your inventory. Then we're doing the inventory year-end close, which is in the routines section in year-end close. So this inventory year-end closing window has a couple of checkbox options that you could choose to do. So to remove discontinued items, to remove sold lot attributes, to remove sold receipts and cost change history. We do not recommend that you mark any of those boxes. We do not recommend that you mark any of those boxes. If you want to remove discontinued items, there's a better way to do that. And you don't typically want to use this to move cost change history if you're using standard cost. There's other ways to do that. And there's other ways to update the item standard cost apart from this process. So we do not recommend that you mark any of these boxes, simply mark the process. There's no checkbox to keep the report. It does not create. Don, could you check and be sure everyone is muted for me, please? There is no report that prints when you close inventory. There's no report that prints when you close inventory. So be aware of that. And for those of you who are familiar with the process monitor, you can validate that the process monitor shows when it's completed. So it's doing a number of things. It's summarizing the current year activities and quantities. The beginning quantity of each item is updated on the on-hand quantities, and the quantity sold field for each item is reset to 0. So there's a variety of things going on. Other things that are typically a part of your process for period end and potentially year end is in that routines section of inventory to, I guess it's in utilities. My mistake, it's in the utilities section. I'm gonna go down to utilities. This inventory reconcile, which can take a bit of time to run, but certainly should be a part of your ongoing processes for period end and year end, to validate that all of your quantities are in the right buckets and you have a accurate indication of allocated quantities and so forth. Okay. Any questions about inventory year end? Okay, we're going to go on to fixed assets. So if you're not using fixed assets in GP, I highly recommend it. It's got great features and functionalities that can help you with control of your fixed assets and integrates to both payables and purchase order processing. So we're going to just do this pretty briefly. We're looking at the last period end process, which includes additions, changes, transfers, and retirements. do that last asset depreciation, create your fixed asset transaction to the GL posting window, and then similar to that, we would do year-end function for the same kind of things. Make sure that you get all of your year-end reports for all of the reports that you do to balance your inventory to the general ledger in the fixed asset reports. And then once you've completed all of those steps, you do this fixed asset depreciation window to do the year-end function. So I'm going to go to financial routines and fixed assets. So in the financial area page, in routines is the year-end function. You'll see that my window looks slightly different than it did on the older version of the slide, but you have any or all of the books that you chose to create. Now you may have one book and you may have lots and lots of books. That's one of the features that's available to you. So you can pick which book you're going to close, or you can insert all of them. What's on this selected books is the part that's going to get continued when you continue the function. Be sure that you have depreciated everything through the end of the year. Now, for those of you who use a disparate period of like days, or if you do the 334 kind of thing where you've got different numbers of days in individual periods, it's possible that your next year calculation for the amount of depreciation for any particular asset might be a different amount than it was a prior year. And that's because it's going to calculate what next year's depreciation is based on how you have those fiscal periods set up in your general ledger fiscal setup. Okay, so an important distinction, if you're not doing 12 equal periods, you may have a different dollar amount for individual assets in a future year than you did in a prior year. So be careful when you're looking at your assets and looking forward that you're looking at your fiscal period setup to know how that's going to play out. Okay. Make sure. Okay, our fixed asset general ledger posting, we talked about that. Make sure your last journal entry is done. Then your year-end close. It does have a report. Be sure and put it in your 2024 year-end close information. There's your checklist. Then we're going to talk about the checklist for the general ledger checklist. I have just a couple of slides and then we'll go to our next poll question. So in the general ledger, once you've completed all of the steps for all of our prior subledger balances, then you run all of your trial balances, all of your financial statements, etc. Close the fiscal periods. Make sure that you verify all account types. In Appendix 6 in the workbook, it talks about how to look at your GL accounts and verify that the GL accounts are set up with the proper setting. So if I go to my cards accounts, that is referring to these posting types for balance sheet and P&L. This field is what's determining whether it's moving a balance forward to a new year or whether it's closing the P&L accounts to retained earnings. So this is a super important field. You can do that based on a smart list, or you can do it based on individual account review. You're going to make your Dynamics and GP company backups, verify your account types. Again, we have that history settings, and you do this history settings in the general ledger setup window. So you'll see here that we have maintain history set for all of these values, as well as an allow posting to history. Allow posting to history gives you the ability to be able to post a transaction into that most recent closed year if your accountant comes back and says, oh, we have some closing entries for you to do. You can do that as long as the posting to history is set and the retained earnings values are set up. So back up again. You can never have too many. Do another backup. And we're ready for the next poll question.
So we've got poll question number 3 up. Please take a look at your options and make a selection.
Okay, Dawn, let me know when we can move along.
Yep. Hey, please make your selection. I'll be closing down the poll question in just a few moments. All right.
Thank you. So a couple of warnings. When you're doing the GL close, make sure that you're aware of any single-use batches that are in your GP. Now that could mean that you've got sales orders that are open and incomplete, in which case that would be an accurate thing to be able to continue, right? Because sales orders you want to keep open until you satisfy those by shipping and invoicing against those sales orders. But you do want to be sure that all of those unposted batches do not contain anything that would impact your year-end close values. So when you do the general ledger year-end closing, that window does have a green status bar. You will be able to see as it moves forward with the closing of year-end. It also tells you the steps, step 2 of 3, step 3 of, 3 of 7, 4 of 7, 5 of 7. So it's telling you as it's producing the year-end close information. So this one's nice. It gives you information about how it's doing against that. Please be patient. Don't accidentally click on that close button more than once. Don't end the task if you think that it's not doing anything. Don't use Task Manager. Like, look at the green bar, watch for it to complete. Do not force GP to close. Don't shut down your workstation or the server. We've seen all of these things happen. So don't be that. You don't want that for yourselves. Please be patient. Let it complete its process. You do get a report. Be sure that year-end close report goes to, I like to make it go to the screen, to the printer, and to a file. It's not multiple pages of, reams of paper like some of the others are. Typically, it's a few pages, which means that it can print to a printer. It gives you the opportunity to be able to see what the transaction was that got created. It will show you everything that got closed to the retained earnings account, and it will show you the journal entry number that did that retained earning close. So you'll see in the highlighted fields, you'll be able to review those and know that you've got exactly what you expect for your close of that functionality, right? It does show process complete when you've completed the last step, when it has completed its last step of the process, and then you can click the X to close the box. So general ledger notes, unlike AP and AR, general ledger does not need to be closed before posting to the new year. You can post into the new fiscal year as soon as you get it created. Again, before you're closing the year, it's very important to verify those account types. Call us if you need any help with that. We're happy to do that. And poll question number 4.
And we've got a number of ways that LBMC Tech can help. And we would love to assist you on upgrading or business process review. And I will certainly keep folks informed of future webinars that are conducted by LBMC Tech. So I'm going to close this down in just a couple of moments. Please make please select an answer. Right.
Okay, the last couple of slides really have to do with the appendix that are in the back of the workbook. But for those of you who don't have the workbook, you can still benefit from what those appendix are showing you, including the ability to be able to take the GP company offline or send your GP users a message. Those have been available since GP 2013 R2. We'd be happy to show you how to use those functionalities. They're really helpful at year end. Smart list for unposted transactions gives you ability to quickly look and see what things need to get cleaned up and managed for period end and year end. The history settings we mentioned. This one I think is really awesome, and it's quite an underutilized option for GP users. These account roll-ups, if you have multiple accounts that are cost of goods sold or inventory or accounts receivable, the account roll-up allows you to be able to see all of those things rolled up into a single inquiry window without exporting things to GP, to Excel, sorry. So we can help you with that as well. 1099 vendor setups, GL account setups, right? All of these things are all available for you. And poll question number 5. And I'll mention that I kind of skipped past some of the navigation list such. So if you're interested in navigation lists, if you want to go ahead and mark that as a selection for this one, we'd be happy to show you what a navigation list is, and how you might use it, including
What
as a
a,
workflow.
that's a great offer. I hope people take advantage of that. I'm going to be ending the poll in just a few seconds here. All right.
There is a tool within GP called Reconcile to GL. These couple of slides at the end here really have to do with some tools that are available to you, including one that works with Excel to reconcile where you may not reconcile your subledgers to the GL. There are some other additional ISV tools that are available to help you reconcile to the GL. And then lastly, I just put my bio in here just so that you can have it when you get the slide deck. If there's anything specific that I can help you with personally, my email is on the slide, and Dawn would obviously be excited to hear from you. If you prefer to go through the marketing team, we can certainly route those options to the people who can best support your questions and any needs that you may have.
Okay. Thank you so much, Sandy. Really great stuff today. I know everyone was plugged in and listening to what you have to say. If you would stop sharing, we can turn the screen over to Christina. Christina Wedge is a VP of Channels at VersaPay, and they're our sponsor today. And as I mentioned, Christina is going to just talk briefly, and then we're going to have the final poll question. And VersaPay is doing two things for us today. One, through their sponsorship, they make it possible for everybody who wants CPE to get CPE certificates. They're underwriting that. And then they're also very generously donating the $250 Amazon gift card for the drawing that we have for poll question number 6. So, Christina, without any further ado, please go ahead.
Thank you so much. And I apologize, I joined and didn't realize I wasn't on mute, so I disrupted your presentation. I apologize for that. Thank you so much for allowing us to present here. I will be quick because I know you've been on for a while. I just wanted to show this slide here. So VersaPay provides not just integrated payments. I think the biggest misconception when people hear VersaPay's name is that we are just credit card and ACH payments integrated within the ERP, and that's actually not the case. What you can see here is our entire connected network, which is the full invoice to cash automation suite. So we have a customer portal that your customers can log into. We also have a supplier portal where you can collaborate with your customers back and forth to take care of any sort of collections, disputes. It has additional searches, but it happens right inside the portal, so you don't have to rely on email exchanges or phone calls. It's all automated within the portal. We do have advanced dunning inside of our collection modules, as well as straight through processing with virtual cards. And for those of you who haven't heard of virtual cards, it is getting a lot of traction, especially in the integrated payments world. So if you'd like to learn more, I'm happy to give that to you. We also automate the cash application process. So think lockbox checks, any sort of wires. We are automatically matching those to open invoices. We have about a 96% match rate on those. So it's not just automating the credit card and ACH process, which everyone's used to. It's also automating the cash in process holistically, leveraging machine learning and AI, inclusive of the bank reconciliation entries on top of just the payment matching to the invoice. As I mentioned, we do have the payment services, which we're known for. And again, some people think that's all we're known for. And last but not least, the operations portal. So everything happens online, payment operations. It gives you additional reporting that you can share with your customers, but also leverage internally to run your own business, especially collections and advanced dunning. Whoops, my computer just got stuck. So what does that look like? From here, you can get one or all. So we scale with the business. We like to say land and expand. So if you have customers that are just interested in payments, we can absolutely do that. So even with customers, sometimes they'll start with payments and then they'll scale up to the customer portal. And then they'll scale up from there to collaborative AR and then cash application. So again, it's automating the full invoice to cash process, not just the payments piece of it. And that's actually all I have today. I wanted to keep it short and sweet. And as Dawn mentioned, we are sponsoring the Amazon gift card. And if you'd like to learn more about how to make your back office processes easier, feel free to reach out. And here's our last
So
polling question.
here it is. If there's any polling question, this is the one to answer. This has the most excitement around it. But please know, this presentation is part of our monthly GP office hours. And we offer GP office hours to make sure that our GP customers continue to have a rich and valuable experience. And LBMC Technology Solutions likes to say that we want to be the last technology partner you'll ever need. And we want to take care of you today and well into the future. We have got probably the best GP team on staff at LBMC Technology Solutions. And we want to make sure that you're getting value out of your system today and in the coming years. So I'm really excited about this. I put a couple of other webinars in the chat. We're going to do a repeat of Sandy's session in December. It's the exact same content, but if there's someone else in your organization that you think might benefit from this, be sure and let them know. And then in January, or we're also going to do, if you have a payroll module, we're going to do payroll year end. And that's a full 90 minutes just on the complexities and nuances of closing out your payroll. And then in January, our president, Brian Wilton, is going to be talking about how to navigate forward with GP confidently, given the recent announcements by Microsoft. And I think you'd really enjoy what he has to say about, where we're going and how we would like to plan with our customers. So I'm going to end the poll now. I want to thank Christina Wedge from Versa Pay. It made it fun to have a fun little offer at the end. They will be sending out an email with the winner via email, so be on the lookout for that once they do the drawing. I want to thank Sandy Wickman. She puts in a lot of work to do these sessions. She's a much sought after speaker. If you've been to Community Summit or I think it's called Dynamics Con, Sandy has been a speaker at both of those national events. And I hope to see everybody at a future GP office hours. Thanks for joining today.